Welcome to At Home with Anita Rosner. Today we are baking bread. Newsflash, you can buy bread in a store. So the only reason to make it at home is for the sheer pleasure of it. It's fun, it's rewarding, you feel like you've really accomplished something, and it's delicious. Now, if you read up on baking bread, you may be led to believe that it's a very exacting science, and if you get all caught up in, oh, I don't know if I'm doing it right, gee, did this rise enough? You're stressing yourself out and you're missing out on all the fun. So, put your hair back, put on your sweats, wear your most fun apron, because today we are going to demystify the art of baking bread. I'm making a sourdough bread, and in this bowl I have my sourdough starter. You can find the recipe for that up in the corner, and I will put it down in the description. The people in the days of yore used a sourdough starter because they didn't have yeast, and this is what made the bread rise. But we buy yeast, and I'm actually going to use both in this recipe. In this bowl, I have 1 1/4 cups of whole wheat flour and 6 cups of all-purpose flour. You can use bread flour, but you don't have to. They are interchangeable. The only difference is that bread flour has between 10 and 13% more protein in it. And if you have been led to believe that that's going to make a huge difference in the bread that you are lovingly baking for yourself and your family, that is not true. You can use either one. And we've got some salt and 2 1/4 cups of water. So the first thing I'm going to do is throw a little bit of the flour, and I've mixed the two flours together. I'm going to throw that on top of my starter just to cover it. And then I'm going to put on a tablespoon of salt. You don't want the salt right on top of your starter. Then I'll add the rest of my flour, and on top of that I'm going to sprinkle 1 1/2 teaspoons of instant yeast. If you don't have instant yeast and you have to reconstitute your yeast with water, 2 things. You've probably read that your water has to be 110 degrees. Put your thermometer away. Take your water and pour it on the back of your hand. If it feels cold, it's too cold. If it feels hot, it's too hot. If it feels a little bit warmer than your skin, that's the right temperature. When you reconstitute the yeast in the water, sprinkle in a little bit of sugar, because yeast loves to eat sugar, and it will help it proof. And it's not enough sugar that it will affect the taste of your bread. So I'm glad we got that settled. Now, we're just going to pour in the water. And here's where it's going to get messy. You're going to mix it with your hand. I can smell it already. It's awesome. All right. You want to keep one hand clean. With the other hand, you're just going to mix. And you're going to mix it until you feel that all of the water has been absorbed. And if there's a little bit of dry flour on the bottom, that's okay. We'll incorporate that when we turn it out onto our work surface. I feel that's good. Okay, and now we're going to turn it out onto our work surface, but first we have to flour it. Not too much. You want to add as little flour as possible to your dough. All right, let's turn this out. Voila. And now we're going to knead the dough. So you want to put a little flour on your hands. And I find the sweet spot for kneading is about 7 to 10 minutes. I wouldn't do it any longer than that because my arms get tired. You want to stretch it out and bring it back. Stretch it out and bring it back. Turn it, stretch it out and bring it back. That's all there is to it. And the more you work it, the less sticky it becomes, which is good. And everybody has their own style of kneading. This is mine. You do you. We're almost done kneading. And then we're going to put it in a bowl so that it can rise. Now, you've probably heard that it has to double in size. Well, there's no way to measure whether or not it actually doubles in size. You can't measure it by weight because it fills with air, so it won't be double the weight. And you can't measure it by volume because it's rising up and out. So some bakers suggest that you take a grease pencil and mark the side of your bowl. Well, unless you're an astrophysicist, you probably don't have a grease pencil. Others suggest that you put a rubber band around the bowl to mark where it started. I don't have a rubber band that big. But I do have two very useful tools to measure whether or not my dough has risen. And those are my eyeballs. If you can't tell by looking at it that your dough has risen, I don't even know what to say to you. I just don't know what to say. All right, that looks lovely. We're going to flour a bowl, plop that in, and leave it for 20 to 30 minutes. The fun continues. Our dough has risen. Now, you can let this go for as long as 45 minutes. After 45 minutes, if it hasn't risen much, it's not going to. It may rise more in the second rising, but don't bother letting it sit longer than 45 minutes. Okay, so now we want to bring it out. So now we're going to shape the dough. It actually feels warm from the yeast growing in there. The object of this game is you want to fold the edges under while turning. And you're going to keep doing this and you'll find your own rhythm. But every once in a while you're going to want to check it because, let me see, if it's got this big gaping hole, you need to keep doing it because what you want to do is close up that gap. So find your rhythm and roll that dough. And while you're doing this, you're stretching the dough across the top. The gap is gone. Now, we're going to proof it again. I don't have a proofing basket. You don't need one. You can use a colander. Just line it with a kitchen towel, flour it. Now we're going to cover this and leave it for 2 hours. If you don't have a colander, you can just use a bowl. But if you don't have a colander, I don't know how you make spaghetti. So this needs to prove again for 2 more hours. But set your timer for 1 hour and 30 minutes because in 1 hour and 30 minutes is when you will start to preheat your oven at 475. We're actually going to bake our bread inside a pot. That helps it steam and that makes the crust beautiful. Ideally, if you have a cast iron Dutch oven, that would be awesome. An enamel coated Dutch oven. I don't have either of those. I have this. So while the oven is preheating, for the last 15 minutes, put this inside the oven. We're going to preheat this as well. This is a lame, which is a razor blade on a stick. And we're going to use this to score the dough before we bake it. You don't need one of these. You can just snip the top of your dough with kitchen shears, or you can use an X-Acto knife. And the reason we score the bread is not just for the artistry. Yes, it's decorative. You don't have to make it decorative. You can just put some slashes in it. But it has a purpose, and that's to allow the bread to expand as it's baking instead of just cracking open, because it will find a way to open and it will crack at the weakest point. This is super duper hot, so be careful. We're going to tip our bread into the hot pot, score it, and then place it in the oven with the lid on. This looks beautiful. I'm going to give it the knock test. Sounds good. We do not want to cut this yet because it's still baking inside, and if you cut it too soon, it will collapse. You know, you'll crush the bread. So you've really got to let it cool. I know it's not easy, but you must restrain yourself. Let's cut into it and see what it looks like on the inside. This is just the way I like it. Ooh. And it smells fantastic. So now that you know how easy it is to bake a beautiful loaf of bread, let me see you do it. Tag me on Instagram or Twitter and let me know how it came out. I'd love to see it. Join me next time here at home with Anita Rosner.